Few emotions disrupt relationships more powerfully than jealousy and possessiveness. These feelings can transform loving partners into suspicious monitors, turn affection into control, and replace trust with constant anxiety. We typically attribute jealousy to natural instincts or reasonable concerns about losing someone we love. But Sigmund Freud proposed a far more radical understanding of these emotions, one that turns conventional wisdom on its head and reveals the surprising unconscious forces driving these painful experiences. Freud's theory of jealousy wasn't simply that we fear losing someone we love. His insight went deeper, suggesting that jealousy contains elements completely hidden from our conscious awareness, aspects so contradictory to our self-image that we reflexively deny their existence. This theory remains shocking precisely because it challenges our understanding of not just jealousy, but the fundamental nature of love itself. At its core, Freud proposed that jealousy isn't a single emotion, but a complex blend of three distinct elements: competitive jealousy, projected jealousy, and delusional jealousy. Each layer reveals something profound about our unconscious mind and how it shapes our experience of love. Understanding these distinctions provides a powerful lens for examining our own feelings and relationships. The first layer, competitive jealousy, seems most obvious. It stems from the pain of potential loss and the competitive desire to maintain our position as the preferred partner. This aspect aligns with our common understanding of jealousy as protecting what we value. But Freud recognized that even this seemingly straightforward dimension contains deeper complexities, including reactivated sibling rivalries and childhood competitions for parental attention that shape our adult response to perceived rivals. The intensity of competitive jealousy often seems disproportionate to the actual threat, precisely because it taps into these older wounds. The colleague who seems too friendly with your partner triggers not just current concerns, but echoes of the sibling who received more attention, the friend who was chosen over you, or other early experiences of being replaced or overlooked. These associations operate unconsciously, explaining why rational reassurance often fails to soothe jealous feelings. But it's Freud's second layer, projected jealousy, that begins to challenge our conventional understanding. Projected jealousy stems not from external threats, but from our own disowned desires. Freud proposed that we project onto our partners the very attractions and infidelities we unconsciously desire but cannot acknowledge. The partner who constantly accuses without evidence, who sees threats where none exist, is often revealing their own unconscious wishes rather than responding to reality. This projection occurs because certain desires create too much internal conflict to acknowledge directly. A person raised with rigid moral codes around fidelity might experience attraction to others as profoundly threatening to their self-concept. Rather than consciously processing these normal human feelings, they project them onto their partner, experiencing as external threat what is actually internal conflict. The most powerful evidence for this projection mechanism appears in those who experience chronic, severe jealousy without evidence. Their accusations often reveal with startling specificity exactly what they would do if acting on their own disowned desires. The husband obsessed with the idea that his wife is flirting with colleagues may be revealing precisely how he himself would pursue an affair if he allowed himself to act on unacknowledged attractions. This projection creates a painful paradox. The more strongly someone denies their own capacity for attraction outside the relationship, the more likely they are to project these disowned feelings onto their partner. Those most consciously committed to monogamy while unconsciously struggling with contradictory desires often become the most accusatory, finding evidence of betrayal in innocent interactions, precisely because they're hypervigilant about impulses they can't acknowledge in themselves. The third layer, delusional jealousy, represents the most extreme manifestation, where jealous fantasies become fixed beliefs resistant to contrary evidence. While clinically distinct from normal jealousy, Freud suggested it reveals in exaggerated form the mechanisms operating more subtly in everyday jealousy. The delusion serves as defense against recognizing unacceptable impulses in oneself, with the intensity of the accusation proportional to the threat these impulses pose to self-image. This understanding of jealousy as partially projected desire explains several common but puzzling relationship patterns. It clarifies why reassurance rarely resolves severe jealousy, because the threat exists internally rather than externally. It explains why the most jealous individuals often eventually engage in the very behaviors they accuse their partners of, because the accusation was projection of their own desires all along. And it illuminates why jealousy often intensifies in relationships where attraction is strongest, because desire itself activates the very impulses being defended against through projection. Freud's theory becomes even more challenging when extended to possessiveness. While we typically understand possessive behavior as fear of losing someone we love, Freud suggested it often reveals unconscious hostility rather than love. The need to control a partner's movements, relationships, and choices stems not from excessive care, but from unconscious aggression transformed into overprotectiveness. This hostility has multiple sources in the unconscious. It may represent displaced aggression from other relationships or situations where expressing anger feels dangerous. It often contains elements of revenge for perceived slights or for the vulnerability that loving someone creates. Most disturbingly, it can reflect resentment of the very dependency that love creates, a dependency experienced as threatening to autonomy and therefore generating hostility that gets expressed as possessive control. The connection between possessiveness and unconscious hostility explains the common progression from seemingly protective concern to increasingly controlling behavior. What begins as "I worry about you" gradually reveals its underlying dynamic. "I don't trust you," and ultimately, "I resent the power you have over me." This progression occurs not because love deteriorates into control, but because the control was always an expression of ambivalence rather than pure affection. Gender adds significant complexity to these dynamics. Cultural norms often frame male jealousy as natural protection of what belongs to him, and female accommodation of jealousy as proof of love. These narratives normalize possessive behavior while obscuring its psychological sources. Women, conversely, are often pathologized for expressing jealousy, leading to greater internalization and sometimes indirect expression of these feelings. Masculinity norms particularly complicate men's relationship with jealousy. Cultural messages equating masculine worth with sexual ownership and control create additional pressure toward possessiveness. Simultaneously, prohibitions against male vulnerability make acknowledging the insecurity underlying jealousy especially threatening. This creates the paradoxical pattern of men sometimes being more controlled by jealousy precisely because they cannot acknowledge the vulnerability it reveals. The developmental origins of jealousy provide further insight into its grip on adult relationships. Freud recognized that our first experiences of triangular relationships occur in early childhood, as we negotiate sharing parental attention and affection with siblings or other caregivers. These early experiences create templates for managing the threat of replacement that re-emerge in adult romantic triangles. Children who experienced inconsistent attention or witness parental infidelity develop heightened sensitivity to potential abandonment. Their nervous systems become programmed to detect the slightest cues of divided attention or interest, creating hypervigilance that adult rationality cannot easily override. What appears as irrational jealousy often reflects the emotional logic of a child who learned that loved ones can suddenly shift their attention elsewhere. Attachment patterns significantly influence how jealousy manifests in adult relationships. Those with anxious attachment experience more frequent and intense jealousy, perceiving threats in minimal cues due to their underlying expectation of abandonment. Avoidantly attached individuals often report less conscious jealousy, but may engage in preemptive distancing when feeling threatened. Secure attachment creates resilience against excessive jealousy through the fundamental expectation that relationships can weather normal attractions and interests outside the partnership. The most provocative aspect of Freud's theory concerns the relationship between jealousy and desire. Contrary to our assumption that jealousy reflects the intensity of love, Freud suggested it often actually intensifies desire. The perceived threat of a rival activates competitive instincts that reignite passion that might otherwise fade through familiarity. This explains the common but rarely acknowledged experience of feeling increased attraction to a partner when they receive attention from others. This connection between jealousy and desire reveals something profound about the nature of romantic attraction itself. Desire thrives not on complete possession, but on the tension between having and not having. The partner who seems slightly beyond our complete possession, who maintains relationships, interests, and parts of themselves not entirely accessible to us, often remains more desirable precisely because they cannot be fully controlled or possessed. This creates a fundamental paradox in romantic relationships. The possessiveness that seeks to eliminate all space between partners actually diminishes the very desire it aims to secure. Complete possession eliminates the slight distance across which desire operates. This explains why relationships often lose erotic intensity as they gain security, and why jealous attempts to control a partner's independence typically reduce rather than enhance authentic desire. The fantasy underlying possessiveness of complete union that eliminates all separation actually reflects what psychoanalysts call a death instinct rather than a life instinct. The elimination of all difference and distance creates not vibrant connection, but static merger. Genuine intimacy requires maintaining the tension between connection and separateness, allowing each partner to remain a distinct subject rather than becoming merely an extension of the other's needs and fears. Understanding jealousy as partially projected desire and possessiveness as containing unconscious hostility creates possibilities for addressing these feelings more effectively. Rather than focusing exclusively on the partner's behavior that triggers jealousy, this approach invites examining what these feelings reveal about our own disowned desires, fears, and conflicts. When jealousy arises, the critical question becomes not just, what am I afraid my partner might do? But, what does this feeling reveal about desires or fears I'm struggling to acknowledge in myself? This inquiry doesn't invalidate concerns about a partner's behavior, but adds a crucial dimension often missing from our understanding of our own emotional responses. Similarly, when we feel possessive impulses, we might ask not just, how can I ensure my partner remains committed? But, what hostility or resentment might be expressing itself through my need for control? This questioning doesn't mean all possessiveness stems from negative feelings, but it creates space to recognize mixed emotions that might otherwise remain unconscious. The therapeutic approach to jealousy emerging from Freud's understanding involves several key elements. First, normalizing the universal nature of jealousy reduces shame that often prevents honest examination of these feelings. Everyone experiences jealousy. The question is not whether we feel it, but how we relate to and express these feelings. Second, developing awareness of projection mechanisms helps distinguish between responses to actual relationship threats and reactions to our own disowned feelings. This doesn't mean dismissing jealousy as just projection, but developing discernment about its sources and proportionality. Third, exploring the developmental origins of jealousy patterns helps contextualize their emotional intensity. Understanding how early experiences of triangular relationships, parental infidelity, or inconsistent attention shaped our sensitivity to potential abandonment creates compassion for these responses while beginning to transform them. Fourth, addressing the attachment insecurities underlying excessive jealousy creates more fundamental change than merely managing jealous behaviors. As basic trust in relational security increases, the hypervigilance driving jealous responses naturally diminishes. This security develops through consistent, reliable relationships, whether therapeutic or romantic, that contradict early expectations of abandonment or replacement. Fifth, developing tolerance for the ambivalence inherent in intimate relationships reduces the need for defensive projection of disowned feelings. As we become more able to acknowledge the complex mixture of love, desire, resentment, and independence that exists in all intimate relationships, we have less need to locate these conflicts externally through jealous accusations. For those experiencing a partner's excessive jealousy, Freud's theory suggests approaches beyond simple reassurance. While maintaining appropriate boundaries against controlling behavior remains essential, understanding the projection mechanism creates possibilities for more effective responses, rather than endlessly defending against accusations or trying to eliminate all triggers. This approach focuses on supporting the partner in developing greater internal security and integration of disowned feelings. This doesn't mean accepting abusive, jealous behavior or taking responsibility for a partner's psychological work. It means recognizing that severe jealousy typically reflects internal conflicts that will not resolve through external reassurance alone. Professional support often proves necessary when jealousy significantly impacts relationship functioning. Cultural factors powerfully influence how jealousy manifests and is interpreted. Societies that normalize possessiveness as proof of love create environments where the psychological sources of these feelings remain unexamined. Conversely, cultures that support both secure attachment and appropriate individuation within relationships create conditions where jealousy can be recognized as a signal for reflection rather than a mandate for control. The most transformative aspect of Freud's theory is its challenge to our understanding of love itself. If jealousy partially reflects projected desire and possessiveness contains unconscious hostility, then the feelings we call love often contain more complexity than we acknowledge. The sentiment, "I can't live without you," reveals not just attachment, but the resentment this dependency creates. The complaint, "You don't spend enough time with me," may contain not just desire for connection, but unconscious wish for distance expressed through impossible demands. This complexity doesn't invalidate love, but invites a more integrated understanding of romantic feelings. Mature love involves not the absence of jealousy or occasional possessive impulses, but the capacity to recognize and take responsibility for these feelings, rather than acting them out through accusations or control. It means acknowledging the ambivalence that exists in all intimate relationships, while choosing behaviors aligned with care rather than fear or hostility. The ultimate freedom from jealousy's grip comes not from achieving perfect security, an impossible goal in inherently uncertain human relationships, but from developing tolerance for the vulnerability that loving inevitably entails. As we become more capable of acknowledging the risk involved in caring deeply about someone whose choices we cannot control, jealousy transforms from overwhelming threat to manageable signal of our investment. Similarly, possessiveness diminishes not through gaining greater control, but through accepting the fundamental separateness that exists even in the closest relationships. As we develop capacity to love others as distinct individuals rather than extensions of ourselves or solutions to our emotional needs, the impulse to control naturally decreases. Paradoxically, this acceptance of separateness creates the conditions for more authentic closeness than possessive merger ever could. The journey beyond jealousy and possessiveness doesn't progress linearly, but spirals through cycles of insight and regression. Old patterns re-emerge during stress or when new situations trigger early wounds. What changes through psychological development isn't the complete elimination of jealous feelings, but our relationship to them, our ability to recognize them as information about our internal state, rather than mandates for defensive action. This developmental view reframes jealousy not as a character flaw, but as an opportunity for greater self-understanding and relationship growth. When approached with curiosity rather than shame, jealous feelings can reveal our unacknowledged desires, our developmental wounds, our attachment needs, and the unconscious conflicts that shape our experience of love. This information, painful as it may be to acknowledge, creates possibilities for more conscious choices about how we love. Freud's shocking theory ultimately offers not pessimism about romantic love, but a path toward its more mature expression. By bringing unconscious patterns into awareness, we gain freedom from their automatic control over our feelings and behaviors. This doesn't create perfect relationships free from jealousy's pain, but relationships where these inevitable human emotions become opportunities for deeper connection rather than triggers for destructive control. The capacity to love without possessiveness, to care deeply while allowing the other their full separateness, represents one of adulthood's most challenging psychological achievements. It requires integrating the childlike desire for complete merger with the mature recognition of the other's fundamental separateness. This integration creates not the fantasy of perfect union, but the reality of loving another person in their full humanity, with all the vulnerability and reward such love entails.